Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Great. Jen, if you're ready, I'd like to go ahead and introduce you.
I'm ready.
Great. All right. Today we're going to be talking about user experience and service design. And I just want to give you a brief introduction for Jen. Jen Nolte worked in library information technology at Yale University for over a decade before shifting over to user experience research. Holds an MLIS from Southern Connecticut State University and is currently pursuing an MS in organizational psychology at the University of Hartford. She recently served on the Connecticut UX Professionals Association board, currently serves on the New Haven IO board of directors, and hosts a monthly informal meeting for UX practitioners and enthusiasts in Connecticut. So thank you, Jen, for presenting to us today, and I'll just hand it over to you now.
Great, thank you. So I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen, and please feel free to just throw questions into the chat, and I'll be happy to answer them as they come up. All right. Cool. Okay. Can everybody see my screen? Okay, cool.
Yes.
All right. So my colleague, Anu Paul, who is a member of the project management group for part of DLF, asked me to do a quick presentation on service design and service blueprinting. It's a practice that in my work we've kind of gotten into quite a bit recently, and I want to kind of go through the different components of how sort of what the rationale for doing service blueprinting is, and what service design is, and how it kind of relates to user experience and user-centered design. And let me just make sure that I have the chat open and up, because I can't encourage you to use the chat when I don't see the chat. That doesn't make sense. All righty. So what we're going to talk about, what is service design? What does this have to do with user experience? What does this have to do with libraries? What is a service blueprint? And service blueprinting in action. So this image is from Nielsen Norman Group's article on service design, and it really illustrates quite succinctly the different components of service design, and kind of encapsulates the approach that service design thinking takes towards anything really. So at the top you see the blue arrows representing the customer journey, and then little dots in between those arrows, and the Nielsen Norman Group is chosen to label that business, so that could mean business processes, people in the business, and whatnot. And then at the bottom there are sort of representations of the different components that could also go into providing a particular service. So props, any kind of like resource or product, the people who deliver those resources or products or otherwise support that delivery, and then processes like workflows and automation, things like that. All of these things, I'm not explaining anything new to you all, I'm sure. All of these things make up or comprise a service. What service design aims to do is to sort of deconstruct all of these different pieces and document them, and then put them all back together, but with the perspective of delivering optimal services to customers and or users. So again, it's not really anything earth-shattering in terms of how to stand up a service. I think a lot of us know how to do that, but it is kind of a useful way to methodically and systematically take the components of a service apart, look at them, understand them, and then put them back together, especially when a service is particularly complicated or involves more than one department. And we'll see examples of this later on when we talk about service blueprinting. Questions so far? Okay. So what does this have to do with user experience? What is this service design approach? What does that have to do with UX? Do we have any thoughts on that? Feel free to jump in or just write something in the chat. Okay. So the relationship between user experience and service design is, again, service design is a way of documenting and pinpointing the different components of a service, but with the aim of improving those services for the end user, the customer. And of course, I said the magic word, end user. And end user is what user experience is really focused on. That the user's experience should be the thing that companies care about and focus on and try to optimize as much as possible. So the service design perspective and approach really pairs well with and complements. And I would argue it's part of, but there's a lot of turf war among user experience people, service designers, and customer experience people. So we won't get into that, but I would argue that service design is a part of user experience. So what does this have to do with libraries? And you might already have guessed this, but I wanted to take a quote from a recent charge for a task force at Yale Library that my group, Assessment and User Experience Research, has been working on. And this task force was told to review the library's request to delivery workflow. So the process by which a patron makes a request for a purchase for an item, and what goes into getting that item from the point of request to the point of purchase, and then sort of in the hands of the patron, right? So the charge for the task force was to review the library's requested delivery workflows to identify possible areas for improvement, and then make recommendations to improve the turnaround time and efficiency, blah, blah, blah. So we're talking about workflows and processes that already exist. We're not talking about creating something from the ground up, right? So what can a service design approach do for services that are already in place and that are pretty complex, right? Because the request to delivery workflows, I should say, there's many of them, really bounce around several different departments before they settle back into the hands of the patron, right? So taking a service design approach to some of these very sort of hidden departments with their somewhat opaque workflows is really valuable in terms of, again, identifying the different components that it takes to go into to make a service work. It could uncover sort of some hidden inefficiencies that maybe people didn't realize were there. It also, helps to create greater appreciation across departments for the colleagues in other departments that are a part of the process. So, you know, when you don't know a colleague's workflow because you just don't do their work and they don't do yours, you just don't know what it's like to be them. And having that empathy for your colleague really makes people reinvest in the work and in providing the service in general, which is, you know, sort of a touchy-feely, warm and fuzzy kind of outcome from the service design approach. But I'll take it. Warm and fuzzy is pretty good. We can that's always needed, right, in this world. And I think I lost the chat just to make sure. Okay. So, but workflows are not necessarily services unto themselves, right? So I mentioned like several different workflows that might go into a particular service, right? But by identifying and articulating some of those workflows that comprise a particular service, like the purchase request, the purchase requesting service at the Yale Library, by articulating those workflows and really putting them down and documenting them, we can find some real places for improvement and efficiency. So I talked about service design, and so now I want to talk a little bit about service blueprints. So that's kind of a really big piece of service design, and it may look familiar to some of you. And some of you may have already even done service blueprinting. Anu Paul, my colleague, is pretty heavy into this this kind of work herself. So, what is a service blueprint? So it's a model of the steps in a service from start to finish, from the customer's viewpoint, but also from the viewpoint of the organization or the different departments that are trying to support and provide that service. It's a communication tool and a path to a shared vision. A service blueprint is a generator of team buy-in. So again, that notion of reinvesting in the services that you're providing by you know, talking about all the different components of that service and articulating their value. A service blueprint is an analysis of the critical points in a service, and it is an artifact that can and should be shared, edited, and discussed widely. So note that in the first bullet point where I say it's a model of the steps in a service from start to finish, start, I'm doing air quotes, start and finish are relative terms. So a lot of times I like to talk about or think about a service blueprint as kind of a telescope or a microscope, right? You can zoom in and out with a service blueprint, but you kind of have to decide how far out you want to zoom or how far in. So in other words, the service of, let's say, checking out a book, right, to a patron. What is the start and the finish of that particular service? Is the start of the service when the patron walks up to the service desk or circulation desk? Is the start of the service when the patron requests an item to be delivered to a particular circulation desk online, like several days prior? When does it end? Does it end when the patron walks away with the book checked out in their hand? Does it end when the patron returns the book? You know, it's really, you know, you have to kind of pick your battles in some ways. What is the most useful thing for the project or for the project or for the question that you're trying to solve, or problem that you're trying to solve, question you're trying to answer, what is the scope that's most useful there? So it might be that you cut off that finish, the finish at not when the patron returns the book, but when the patron checks the book out. Or maybe you want to sort of analyze what it's like when a patron keeps a book that's past its due date. Like, what does that sound like? What does that look like, rather? So you kind of have to decide what's appropriate, but you'll know what that is. What you don't want to do is go overboard and try to document every single blessed thing that could possibly go into a service, because even thinking about that makes me really tired. There's so many pieces to all of our services. They're scaffolded on so many different things, so you really have to sort of decide and carve out the piece that you're trying to analyze. But don't worry, there'll be time enough to do all those other service blueprints with all the other pieces that you missed the first time, because we all have so much time, right? Okay. So why would you do a service blueprint at all? Like, why would you do it? So you can generate a service blueprint in order to improve an existing service. So by understanding the original service in detail, again, taking the pieces of that service apart and documenting them, it's possible to identify pain points and eliminate or ameliorate some of those pain points, or at least be aware of them, right? I mean, if how many people have the services in their libraries where there's a known issue that everybody kind of has to live with and deal with, while they're trying to provide this service, and it's just something that they have to sit with until a solution can be found, or time and attention can be paid to that problem. At least it's there, and at least it's it is a documented problem, and that's something that a service blueprint can do for an existing service. Service blueprints can also help you design and plan a new service. So of course, it's not going to articulate every little piece of a service that sort of hasn't existed before, but it can provide you with a model to help you think about what the service might look like, and also, again, remember, it's a communication piece, so you can take that model and bring it around to other groups that you might be collaborating with in that service, and say, well, this is what I think the service might look like from the user's perspective, and here's where I think your department might come in, and here's where I think my department might come in, and here are the pain points, and here are the this and the that. And imagine talking about all of that stuff up front, way ahead of time. And even, sort of getting that conversation to move beyond sort of project managers, and maybe even into some of the service providers, like frontline staff, for instance. So they are always experiencing the edge cases, right? And, discussing edge cases could be a useful exercise when planning out a new service, just to make sure that your service is robust enough or stable enough to withstand some oops, I think somebody came unmuted. Hang on. Okay, everybody just make sure that their mic's unmuted, please. Katrina asks, would a service blueprint be a good starting point for a procedure manual for those providing the service? Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think it might be a way to get people all on board with the service right off the bat. it really, you know, I'm working on a service blueprinting project for this request to delivery task force. I mean, it was a pretty big undertaking, and I don't think we're done yet. And the pandemic kind of interfered with some of that work, as it has with so many things, right? But one of the things I noticed was, again, that sort of warm and fuzzy added value of doing, approaching things from a service design perspective. As we were doing the service blueprint and putting one together, people were able to like point out, oh, there's where I am, that's where I come in, that's where I provide my service, and so on, and just sort of seeing yourself in the larger scheme of, you know, Yale's a pretty big organization. Seeing yourself in the context of the organization, and really contributing is really, really useful. So if you were to like sit down with a team and say, hey team, this is the service we provide, and you know, this is where you come in and this is where you come in, and I think it's really helpful in terms of encouraging understanding, but also just sort of from a engagement and investment perspective as well. Does that answer your question, Katrina? Cool, great. Okay, so another reason to generate a service blueprint is to understand an existing service. So this is a lot like similar to improving an existing service, but understanding an existing service slightly different, right? You're not trying to really necessarily change the service, but maybe you're trying to approach things in a different way. There are many services that have become so ingrained in organizational culture that they're no longer understood by anyone. They're just sort of accepted as something that we do. And blueprints can reveal silos and areas of opacity in existing processes that could maybe be reimagined or rethought. I have more reasons. So another reason to generate a service blueprint is having better understanding of the actors in a service. When there are a lot of people, many actors involved in providing a particular service, it can be really useful to have a blueprint to help manage the complexity of a situation. So understanding all the different teams and employees that are coming into contact with each other and that have to work together to provide something is really valuable. So transitioning a high-touch service to a low-touch service or vice versa. So broadening or narrowing the audience for a service can be pretty risky or have some unforeseen outcomes. And a blueprint can help you guide the way for that. So let's say you're used to providing a particular service only to faculty, and now you're also going to start providing that service to graduate students. Well, what does that mean? And what expectations do the graduate students, for instance, bring to, what might they bring to the service that you're providing to the faculty that would be a different expectation than the faculty have? So like maybe faculty are used to longer turnaround times and graduate students are not. Maybe the faculty are used to a highly analog process and the graduate students are not. You know, thinking through that and then documenting, you know, kind of mapping, okay, here's what the faculty service blueprint looks like. What happens when we add graduate students as the audience? At what points are there going to be different expectations? Do we think? And a blueprint can help with that. So service blueprinting in practice. So we kind of saw in the Nielsen-Norman group illustration, those, again, that customer journey, those blue arrows. And so here we've got this arrow concept again. This is from a customer journey map, which is not a service blueprint, from a company called Bright Vessel. And the customer journey map is, it's the same kind of concept as a service blueprint, where it's outlining the different steps in a process from the customer's point of view. And then here you see that the Bright Vessel people are also not only articulating the steps in buying shoes, but also articulating sort of the different, like, cognitive or maybe emotional states that either the customer is going through, or sort of ways of describing the stages of the journey, and so on. So you can see there's multiple steps, except for the consideration piece. There's multiple steps in each stage of the customer journey here. And so that customer journey is again, it's something that we're going to keep at the forefront when you're thinking about a service blueprint. But then there's just tons and tons of information that's documented on about what's happening on the back end, that's behind the scenes, let's say. And then this is just a close-up of the different steps from the Bright Vessel customer journey map. So going back to the Nielsen-Norman group diagram here, again, here's our arrows, and then here's our different insertions of the business, or the business processes, people, and props into that journey. So this is a screenshot of a service blueprint that I did with for the student-driven course reserve request process, which is a student-driven request course reserve request process that was rolled out at the beginning of the fall 2019 semester. And we went through, and this was a service that didn't exist, but we did have for students, but we did already know about the service that existed for faculty, let's say. And so we just went through and documented the different steps that the process would have, and tried to better understand how that process, what the different pieces of that process might end up being. And oh, make it bigger. Yeah, you know what? I'm actually gonna, oops, stop here and go into my mural. So I'm gonna stop the share here. Hang on a second. Okay. And can people see this? Let me bring my chat back up. Is that better, Sue? Even better? How about now? Okay, great. Okay, so this is, oh, of course. I mean, there's a reason why I have to keep zooming in, right? There's a lot of stuff here. So let's just hop over. And this, by the way, I didn't make up this sort of template here. This is from the Practical Service Design community, which is a really useful resource. They have tons of information. They have a mural. This is an application called Mural, and they have mural templates. They have handouts. They have everything, all kinds of things. So I encourage you to go and check out that community. I can put the link in the chat at the end of this presentation, and it's also in the at the end of my slides, and I've given that to Anu to distribute to you all. So anyway, let's talk about this. So if we look on the left side here, we've got all these different pretty colors, right? So each of these little colored boxes is a piece of information about the process. So the white boxes are steps in the process from the patron's perspective. The black boxes are steps that are hidden to the patron, but are still steps. They're still points in the journey, right? So remember, this is that tension, the difference between the customer journey and the service blueprint. The service blueprint is going to have more information about what's going on behind the scenes. Touch points, actors, so that's basically any person involved in the process. Systems, policies, observation or facts, metrics or data, questions or areas of ambiguity or uncertainty, critical moments, and ideas and opportunities, right? So I've heard these sections kind of described as swim lanes, and that's not entirely a useful way to talk about it, because even though, you know, up top here you can see, oh yes, this person is swimming in this is swim lane A and this is swim lane B. When you get down to some of the other parts of this blueprint, like policy, for instance, you know, you all will be shocked, I'm sure, to learn that there's a lot of policies involved in providing services in a library. I know that's a very surprising statement to make, but so, you know, we have a ton of orange policy blocks here, and Richard, I'm using a software called mural.co, and I'll just throw that into the chat now, actually. So let's go through the steps here really quickly. So we have this first phase where the patron is initiating the request. And we've got, you know, all of the steps here are white, meaning that they are the steps that the patron is undertaking and can see. So the patron goes to the purchase request form, they fill out the form, and they submit the form, 1, 2, 3. And the touch point there is the library website in the form of a form. And the actor there is the patron. That's it. That's the only person involved. The systems that we've got going on in these 3 steps are Drupal, which is our content management system for our website, and Iliad, which is the interlibrary loan and scan and deliver, and some other stuff. It manages some other stuff. I'm not a access services librarian, so pardon me if I get some of this stuff wrong. And possibly Voyager and Aries come into play when we get to the 3rd step, where we do the patron submits the form. And already we've got policies showing up. The requests are restricted to undergraduate and graduate students. And then there are routing rules for the Iliad requests going to Aries. Jumping down to the metric and data swim lane, can we measure, and again, remember, this is a service that doesn't exist yet, or didn't exist yet at the time that we made this blueprint. We wanted to note that it might be important to capture which courses get requests and what's the course to request ratio. So for what courses are people requesting textbooks, and what courses are people not requesting textbooks, and what is that ratio? A question: how do potential users find out about this service? It's a great question. I think there was a marketing campaign that ended up sort of answering this question that was targeted at students. And then critical moments. In this second step, where the patron fills out the form, we noted that it was important to manage expectations about what can be requested. So it's not a sky's the limit kind of thing, of course. This is a very scoped pilot kind of a project. We were trying it out, so it wasn't library-wide. It was just at, I think, Bass and maybe the Marks Library or Social Science Library, I think. When we were doing the blueprint, the project team said, it's really important to let students know at the point where they're filling out the form what they can actually request. You want to manage those expectations carefully. And then down here we've got ideas and opportunities. We can market the service via the personal librarian. So this is sort of answering this question of how do potential users find out about the service in this first step. Enabling multiple item requests at a time. When a person's filling out the form, can you let them request more than one thing? Certainly they're probably not taking just one course that semester. So maybe you want to enable them to request something for their biology course and their English 101 course, and then another idea, using tags, the tag or notes fields to track courses per request. So again, just sort of trying to make it easy to get that metric of what courses get requests in the course to request ratio. So, and I have talked for, I don't even know how long, just about these 3 steps. I mean, my mouth is kind of dry. So all of that to sort of illustrate, there's a lot that goes into this. This is not it's not a simple and quick way to get a service documented. You can go on and on and on, and I mean this is a relatively uncomplicated service blueprint, to be honest, but it's really, really useful in helping everybody have a conversation about services, get everybody's ideas on the board, but then quickly understand what things should be priorities and what things shouldn't. It's a really great way of keeping focus on making the process work rather than, for instance, worrying about edge cases and having that disrupt the entire conversation about the project. I don't know if that happens to you, but that's happened to me and I've observed that many times. So this kind of keeps everything in perspective. Any questions about this so far? I think I have a couple slides left. Oops. If we want to keep going. Oh, no, that was it. That was my last slide. Is the template being used primarily in planning, and then do you transfer these into subsequent workflows? Yes. So so remember, in this use case, this was for helping to plan out and plot out and think about a service that didn't exist yet, or technically expanding an existing service to a wider audience, right? So yeah, it was really used in the planning. You transfer them to subsequent workflows. Trying to think about that. I guess it's really a way of understanding the workflows that go into a service. So it wouldn't be, I don't think you would want to document the nitty gritty of a workflow, a specific workflow in a service blueprint, unless the service blueprint was only, was scoped very tightly, if that makes sense. So in other words, like, I wouldn't put, you know, first I list the ISBN in the spreadsheet, and then I copy it and text it to, you know, my colleague in acquisitions, and then they, and of course we don't text things, that's not a thing, but I'm just as an example. And I wouldn't like document right down to that nitty gritty level in a service blueprint. So I wouldn't have service blueprints informing workflows in a literal sense. I hope I'm answering your question. Correct. Yes. Yeah. You would flesh out the workflow, I think, a little bit more. Yeah. Great. Thank goodness. Yeah. I'm glad I'm making sense. Any other questions about this? So does it feel like this is way too much? Or does it feel like this is something you could potentially take and apply to your own workflows? Oh, we have a question from Christella. Can you talk more about mural.co and the templates you mentioned? Sure. So Mural is like Lucidchart or I don't know, any other sort of Microsoft Publisher, maybe any other sort of tool that you can use to create like models for different things like workflows, or people use them for customer journey maps. They use Mural for I think I saw them being used for personas once, although I think that's kind of weird. So it's just an online software company, cloud-based software, and you can have a free, I think there's a free account you can create that you can have a couple of a certain number of murals. Each of these things is called a mural. And the template that I use came from Practical Service Design. And I'll just look that up really quickly. So the Practical Service Design community is super fun and friendly, and they have a ton of different resources, and one of them is the mural template. So hopefully you guys can see my screen here, but yeah, here's the template. Did you have other specific questions about the template, Christella? Thanks, Jennifer. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I mean, definitely, if you're interested in service blueprinting and service design, definitely check out practicalservicedesign.com. I'll put this in the chat too, just so you can. Let's make sure I spelled that right. Okay. So I was asking before, though, do people see themselves potentially using this in some of their projects, or does it seem a little bit like overkill? And if so, please don't hesitate to say so, because I'd like to speak to that and see. Okay, great. I'm glad. Thanks, Sue. I definitely love to talk a little bit more, because I mean, it can be seem very overwhelming, but you know, plotting out services and planning them, or even improving them, especially when it's multiple departments and you're just a project manager, can be really daunting. So so the critical moment. So remember that, it's a great question, Sue. Remember that we're thinking about this, even though there's so much information, tons and tons and tons in a service blueprint that does not relate to the user at all, right? It's all back end, like what's behind the scenes, what's the organization doing in order to support this service, right? For the patron, for the customer. But you have to be thinking about the customer at every step, right? So the critical moment for this step 2, where the patron fills out the form, again, you know, you're thinking about that step, and you're trying to think about the patron and what they might be thinking. This is again where user experience really is helpful, because, you know, maybe you have some user research that indicates sort of the mental models of patrons and what their expectations might be or might not be. You're really trying to have empathy for the people that you're providing the service for. So that's why, you know, you don't fill this out by yourself. You fill this out in a group of people, and then you take it to another group of people, and so on. Does that answer your question, Sue? Yes. Yeah, exactly. Every moment, you know, you should be thinking, is this a critical moment? And then Robin says, in some ways it's more useful to map out a workflow using the lucid chart swim lanes template, so it shows the policies, critical moments beyond the people, tasks, and system. Sure. Yeah. I mean, you know, the mural thing is not, it doesn't have to be the way you do it. Technically, the mural, this mural template is a way of doing what you really should be doing in a group with stickies. Yeah. All of these different colored boxes you can do in a, there really should be stickies that you're putting up on a whiteboard and working on in a project group, a project team together. Again, remember that this whole thing is a conversation piece. It's to enhance communication and clarity. Yeah. Any more questions? I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to talk to you guys. And if you have any more questions, or just want to say hello, I sent my LinkedIn link out in my bio. I think Anu sent it out to the group. And please feel free to get in touch or email me at jennifer.nolte@yale.edu. And yeah, I appreciate the time. Oh, sure, of course. Yeah. Barbara says, one more question. Did you have students review the blueprint? No. So to me, I think I know where you're going with that, right? You're kind of saying, okay, well, why don't we get their input, right? To me, that's like saying, that's like putting the design of something in front of a student and saying, what do you think about this design? And that doesn't really that doesn't really help you, and that doesn't really help them either, because when they're using your service, they're not thinking about, oh, you know, this service, the design of this service is not optimal. They're thinking, I'm annoyed, I'm frustrated, I'm trying to get my book, I'm trying to do this, I'm trying to do that. You know, they're not thinking, they're never going to be in a headspace during their day-to-day lives that would cause them to think and contemplate naturally, like the way the service works, right? Yeah, it's just like saying, what do you think about this web page? And then, you know, the first answer you get is, I don't like the blue color. And it's like, okay, you don't like blue. That's a personal preference. That doesn't tell us how you want to use or don't use, or how you would use or wouldn't use our site, you know? Yeah, I would say, yeah, a customer journey map would also be useful in response to the question that Barbara asked. But again, you know, you wouldn't be asking the student to comment on the service itself. You would be asking the student, like, you know, how is it, you know, what is it like to get books from the library? Or how do you do that, or whatever. And then you would hear them tell you how it's done, and the answer might be right or wrong or interesting or all of the above. And then that would inform what you know, the students know about your services, and then that would then inform your service blueprint. Any other questions?
Hey, Jen.
Yeah.
Hi, this is Anu here. I just wanted to say that, can you add these links to your presentation so that when I send your PowerPoint out, they will be part of the presentation?
Yeah, the link, I think they're actually in there already.
Oh, they're there. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Oh, good. I'm so glad. Thank you. Thank you all for your time.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.